Welcome to the Hawks Nest live stream show. My name is Brandon Kane, and I do appreciate you for tuning on in today as we are continuing our way through this offseason here and what is going to be the longest part of the offseason, which is the May, June time period. In July, you just feel like you're right around the corner from training camp. It's just this close away, but here it tends to elongate and take a little bit of time, but that's a good time to go back and take a little bit of a retrospective back through 2024, look at some of the opponents, look at some things that we don't always have as much time to look at in season to get kind of a calibration on. And today we are going to be scouting out the NFC West. We're going to be taking a look at what they did this offseason, how they're set up here for 2025, how the Seahawks are going to need to be able to kind of go after these teams and what is the way to sort of attack and just kind of go all the way around with these teams and taking a look at what they've done to see how big of a challenge we're going to be facing this upcoming season. And spoiler alert, the division isn't getting any easier anytime soon. The West has been for the last 10 years, maybe cumulatively, the toughest division in all of football on a yearly basis. And last year we got to see that again, where us as the third place team with 10 wins did not get into the playoffs. So it's one of those situations where this is just the way it is out here out west. We don't get any weak need opponents. We don't get any of what I like to call the feast factor in our favor. Everyone's going to be pretty tough every week that you're going to have to face, and you're going to have to bring your A game if you want to go and win this division. With that said, let's dive into this, and we're going to start out with the first team here that we want to take a look at, which is going to be the Arizona Cardinals, who finished actually third last year. So we're starting out with the third place team because I like to be unorthodox in that way. And we're going to look at some of the moves that they made this offseason. They came into this offseason with a lot of cap space, almost about $90 to $100 million in cap space. They chose to do some re-upping with some of their guys, like a Trey McBride, who's now, I believe, the second highest paid tight end in the sport, just behind George Kittle. He signed his new contract extension. They went out and made a major contract for Josh Sweat. Dealing with a little bit of allergies again today, folks. Bear with me. We had a long spring here, and it's just, it's knocking me 10 ways from Sunday. They lost Zach Pascal. They brought back Calais Campbell, who's going to be a very helpful part to that defensive line. I think one of the scariest parts about this Cardinal team overall is just the way that they have really reinforced what was a real true bad weakness for them over the past few years, being a light defensive line. Edge, not very good, and they have reinforced that. They did bring back LJ Collier, who didn't play great for them last year, but was functional at times for them inside. They were also bringing back Baron Browning, who was the guy that they made a trade for at the trade deadline to bring in. He's kind of more of a pressure guy than he is a pure sack artist, but he does provide a little more competency off the edge than they've had in recent times. They brought back Greg Dortch to be their slot wide receiver, and wide receiver is one place where I think that there is a tiny bit of weakness there. Adding a couple of other guys here that are not major additions, Roy Lopez, Julian Akawara, whatnot. These are not guys that are going to move the needle. And when it comes down to it, I will say it's kind of surprising that you come through this offseason and Josh Sweat really is the only major signing. It just kind of feels like they didn't go too hard with the money they're spending and that they're just trying to stay more into a patient approach in their team building concept, that they're going to do it through the draft and just very minor supplementation through free agency, though Josh Sweat is a very helpful addition to that team and does help to kind of round out the ranks as far as their edge group goes. But you can see that they didn't make a ton of noise with that $100 million. If you got $100 million to spend, I think you're looking for a little more return than that. I think the Calais Campbell is a great pickup for them because they've got a lot of young edge rushers there and young interior defensive players who can really benefit off the back of having this guy around. There's just no doubt about that. But it was a little bit of a quiet offseason in watching them kind of work and how they were moving in the background a little bit on this one. In the draft for your Cardinals, they went with the Walter Nolan in the first round, Will Johnson in the second, falling due to medical concerns, a guy that I had a blue chip grade on, but that's really based on if he's healthy, if the knee's okay. They went back to the defensive lineman Jordan Birch out of Oregon, Cody Simon and the linebacker there for Ohio State. In fact, Ohio State back-to-back, going with Denzel Burke, a cornerback for them out there on that side, and getting Keaton Crawford in the seventh was really good value. That might be an eventual guy who can start for them. I thought they had an okay draft, but again, much of it was starting out, especially with getting that defensive line reinforced. It just kind of felt like that was the approach from the Arizona Cardinals this offseason as much as anything is we're going to get this defensive line right and well. and up to snuff. And in Walter Nolan, you have a very explosive 3-tech who is a guy that's, just a penetrator, going to live in the backfield, they're hoping. And Will Johnson, they can get another corner there to match up that they think they've got maybe a steal if that knee does hold up. Those are by far their two best picks, the 1 and 2, and could definitely aid this defense a lot immediately into next season, especially if Nolan is able to tap into his great potential really quickly. So, okay draft from the Cardinals. A little lighter as we went along. I don't think Burke's going to do a lot on that side of it, but you do like the Johnson pick up there in the second round, especially if he can ascend to the player that definitely showed you he could be out there at Michigan. So when we look at their depth chart on this one, and we combine that up with a little bit of their stats from last year, we see the Cardinals gave up 214 yards passing last year, 144 yards rushing. They had 23 points for them, so they scored almost 24 points a game, gave up 22 points a game. A team that, really had a real tough schedule through the early part of the year last year. And when you break it down, we now have the data, of course, with the teams and how they played out and what their record is to kind of figure out at this point, what was your true strength of schedule? You've got your strength of schedule going into the season, which is based on last year's records, right? So last year, the Arizona Cardinals had, when it all boiled down and broke down and played out, they had the 5th highest schedule in all of football last year. I think this is a little bit of why when you look at Vegas and why they're looking at our win total versus maybe liking the Cardinals a little bit more, is they like some of those fundamentals that you see from the Cardinals with last year, having that harder schedule and yet still able to go out there and play these teams really tough, going out on Buffalo on the road in the first game of the year and really hanging and standing tall there with a Buffalo Bill team that, of course, went to the conference championship. When you look at their depth chart as it stands right now, no real major losses this offseason outside of maybe a Will Hernandez. We'll see about the Kazir White, their inside linebacker. They got Akeem Davis-Gaither, so if he doesn't come back, they've got an option there. And Owen Popoe is starting to come along for them as well. The former Auburn inside linebacker is playing pretty well for them, so they may have an answer there, but no major losses. They look to retain most of their guys, bringing back Evan Brown at left guard. And when you talk about playing this team, we know last year that Leonard Williams, especially in that first matchup, absolutely destroyed Evan Brown and that Arizona offensive line in general. I mean, he was just wrecking shop. The second game, they came back around and did a lot more doubling with Evan Brown there and helping him out a lot. But that's going to be one of those places when you watch this matchup come up and you go, okay, we're going to get Evan Brown out there on left guard and even a right guard, Isaiah Adams. I mean, that's a matchup that Byron Murphy should be able to dominate as well, or whoever is going to be over there at the nose tackle at this point. So there is a little bit of, I think, weakness to the guard position for the Cardinals. When you look at them, they're a little bit better there with the tackles, and center Froholt is a very, very good center in this league. So they're very solid in a couple of spots on this line, but there's some places that you can go after them. Of course, Trey McBride, maybe the best pass catching tight end of the sport right now as it currently stands, or at least up there in contention. And then when it comes to wide receivers, this is a place that's another little bit of a weakness as I look at it right now, which is that they did not add anything really to their wide receiver core this offseason. It's going to be Mike Wilson, Greg Dortch, and Marvin Harrison Jr. And Marvin had a pretty good rookie year. He didn't light the world on fire wasn't quite Neighbors or Brian Thomas, but he was fine. So when you do look at him, to me, this is where when we go at the Arizona Cardinals this year, guard, wide receiver would be the two real positions that you look at that are the spots that you can maybe get after them a little bit with here. And we've got the right kind of defensive structure, I think, to take that down a little bit in that way. So another big part here with the Cardinals offense, of course, is going to be the commitment to the run game especially. And then it's going to be that gap scheme. I was laughing last year because in a lot of ways, the rushing attack that we were able to bring about was I gotta take the chat off there. Sorry, chat box isn't gonna help. But one of the things that stood out to me about our Hawks last year was that we started to go to the gap pulling stuff later on in the year, and that is the bread and butter of the Arizona Cardinals. So when you go at the Arizona, one of the things that you really got to do is you got to be able to deal with that pile of bodies, because what you do with the gap is you tend to pull two guys back across the formation to the other side of the formation and have them lead out in front. It's kind of like having two lead fullbacks on the play for the running back. And then you put a power back there like James Conner behind those guys, and he's got kind of a line of dudes that can just block whatever comes in their general direction. And that's how they open up a lot of their run game, does the Arizona Cardinals. Now, when you have a backside guy that can go and get it, like a Byron Murphy can penetrate, or like a Leonard Williams that can penetrate off the backside, because you're oftentimes pulling the guard out in front away from that 3-tech. So the 3-tech gets sometimes a free release. And if he's fast enough, he just gets in the backfield, gets the running back before the play can develop, because it is a little bit of a long developing play. And it really is what they do lean on heavily there in Arizona and how they want to run with it. So you need to be able to get the penetration on the gap plays with them. When it comes to passing with Kyler Murray, he keeps talking a little bit about how he wants to try to use his legs more and be more of a runner, but he's kind of sliding and gliding into that place. A lot of quarterbacks that are mobile quarterbacks in the early part of their career end up moving towards as they get later on in their career. You don't want to take as many hits. You're trying to just win by how you throw the football. You're really running begrudgingly. You just really want to try to throw the ball. And I remember watching a few games last year with the Arizona Cardinals that I really felt like, for a guy that's supposed to be so dynamic with his legs, that it goes very quiet with Kyler Murray in his rushing ability and the times that he's choosing to go out there and really use those legs. And it's got to be a big part of his game, because there's going to be detriments to his game like height, where there's just plays on time that he just can't see from within the pocket. And so another place that you can definitely take I think, a little bit of advantage on there with him as well, when you look at Kyler, is a way to kind of make him use his legs, force him to do that. Don't let him bust out the 50, 60 yarders, but hey, let's see if he's going to get, as he gets another year older, will lean back in on that as his method, or if he's a little bit worried that, hey, I don't want to get injured. The time I tore my ACL, I was out there trying to scramble around and go get some yards. I don't want to do that again. So there are a couple places offensively with this Arizona Cardinal team, to me, that you can see that you can go after. I don't think they're very dynamic wide receiver-wise. I don't know if Marvin Harrison is going to come forward that next step. I think he's got a lot of potential, and I love the kid coming out. But there was times last year where he just looked almost a little bit slow for a wide receiver. Like, he just didn't look as quite, on it with the route running. And there's room for improvement. He didn't have a bad year by any measure. He was solid last year overall for them, but they're really hanging their hat on him and Trey McBride to basically carry the load for them in the passing attack, because I just don't think you're getting a lot out of Michael Wilson or Greg Dortch at this point. When it comes to the defense, like I said, it's the defensive line that really, to me, stands out with this team and is very, very impressive. Josh Sweat comes in to be the starter. He kicks out starter Zaven Collins, who's a former inside linebacker that they bumped to edge a couple of years ago, and he's been okay there. But that gives them good depth for the position. And then you get a B.J. Ojulari, former second-round pick that struggled to stay healthy, is now your third edge rusher just on that side of the field alone. They'll mix these guys all up in there. Justin Jones, Darius Robinson, kind of your power edge, strong side edges. Darius Robinson missed most of last year, a first-round pick, kind of picked right at the end of the first round by the Cardinals. And he missed almost all of last year, pretty much was a wash because of an injury. But this is a guy that actually has a lot of talent and can be the power edge for them on early downs at the bare minimum. It's a little bit like DeMarcus Lawrence will be for us, where he should give them some pass rush, but bare minimum, this guy will be a good run defender, I think, in this league. I would be surprised if that was not the case with him. So he comes in, gives them, not even needing to start really for them. Jordan Birch becomes the third guy in there on that one. So just off the edge, they've got some really good depth there. Walter Nolan slides in with Calais Campbell backing him up. Allergies are just killing me today. We got Baron Browning as well out there. So it's kind of, he'll come in off the edge as well. So just these guys are all, I know they've got them kind of listed as almost kind of 4-down defense, but they do a lot of kind of the 3-4-y kind of looks. It's all hybridized anymore anyway, kind of on that. So a lot of different guys that can send it to you that are capable pass rushers or a strong side power edge like Darius Robinson is. Linebacker, not quite as strong. Mac Wilson's fine. But Akeem, I think Davis Gaither is a little bit of a backward step from where they were with Kazir White last year. At the cornerback position, they're okay. There is some potential there too as well, which shouldn't be understated there. You're much like Ojulari. They're kind of waiting on Max Melton to kind of take a step forward to become solidified as a starting cornerback there, a guy that they drafted really high in, I believe it was last year's draft. Buda Baker is awesome money. He's as good as ever. The guy can be used all over the field, and this is a defense that's multiple. It's going to tend to play pretty much a cover 2 shell style of defense. They want to get the job done with the front 4. They don't really want to have to blitz a lot. That's not what they're looking to do. So they'd love to have these corners be able to hold up, and they've got a good safety crew overall there. Jalen Thompson's solid as well next to Buda Baker. Garrett Wilson's one of the better nickel backs in the entire sport. In fact, he is a underrated nickel back in this sport. And then you've got Sean Murphy Bunting, that's where they would like to see for sure Will Johnson come in and ascend over to the top of him. They're hoping that could be a very marketable, improvement there at that particular position, the left cornerback position, as he slides in there and becomes that. There's a lot of potential within this defense, and you can see how they're trying to set the stage for this and kind of creating the Eagles out west version of Gannon's defense. Gannon, of course, coming from that Eagles defense back in the game. So they're doing a good job of getting him the right parts and pieces there, especially considering where the defense was at just a couple of years ago. There's a lot more talent on it. They've got a lot more of an ability to rush the passer again without having to really blitz. So this is a team that's going to be tough, and they don't have a tough schedule as well like they did last year. So it was the tied for the fifth toughest schedule in the NFL last year. They're probably going to be sitting somewhere in the neighborhood of maybe the 18th to 20th easiest schedule this year. So a lot easier schedule on that side of it. Don't lose a lot of guys this offseason out in free agency or losing trade or anything like that. You really cumulatively only got better. Would have thought that they would have spent a little bit more money, and the Seahawks definitely have some methodologies to be able to go at this team in a lot of different ways. I feel like it's going to be a very important key for all the teams within this division. It's going to start defensively stopping the run first and foremost, but the stack boxes, the simulated pressures that Mike Macdonald can run, some of what he did last year against Kyler Murray with not just the mush rush, which when you used to go up against these scrambling, very elusive quarterbacks, you would tell your edges to essentially stutter a little bit of their pass rush. The key is what you're trying to do is kind of close the pocket like a hand going into a fist. That's what you're trying to do, as opposed to just get upfield and go there and do whatever you got to do to get past your guy. Instead, we're all kind of working in tandem for the fist to close. All four fingers essentially come down to close to make it that fist. And so what the Seahawks did in a lot of ways last year watching the tape is that they would create some of that structure, but rather than creating it off the edge, they would create it with their two defensive tackles. So a lot of times, they'd get the defensive tackles going straight up the field in a line, they would shoot up right like that. Sometimes now you would wind in your edges around them. Sometimes you would just spin the edges over the top around the defensive tackles. And then you've got like a double A gap pressure with Jones and Tyrese Knight going, kind of scissoring right back between each other up through that A gap. Kyler gets flushed up because of the way you've created the outside pressure down on him in that way. And so they've got some ways, I think, that they've been able to kind of box in Kyler a little bit. He did not really ever really fully feel comfortable against the Cardinals, against the Seahawks in either of the two matchups. He had a couple of, I think, touchdowns in that second matchup where it seemed like they were going to start to find some answers. But then Mike Macdonald really quickly closed that down. And I feel like this is a matchup that though they're stronger, though they're better, though they're more improved, though they had the tougher schedule last year, though the schedule's easier this year, this is still a team to me that the Seattle Seahawks can go out there and handle business and take care of twice. I just think we're a bad matchup for them. I think Mike Macdonald's brand of defense that asks Kyler Murray to have to be more of a thinking man's quarterback puts Kyler Murray in a trepidatious territory. I don't think that that's how he wants to operate. I think he loves a lot better being able to go against more of the simplified defenses, the four-man fronts and whatnot. And so we'll see if Macdonald can get him twice again this year, like we did last year with it. But the Cardinals are legitimately going to be tough. A lot of this is going to be dependent upon how Kyler Murray plays when it's all said and done, because you can only run so much. You're going to eventually have to come down to passing it. And boy, Kyler doesn't have as many real true playmakers to kind of throw to out there on the outside. Kind of like I think you'd like to see him being given here if you're really going to continue to roll with Kyler in this way. But the Cardinals are going a little bit of a different direction with their franchise quarterback and putting resources in other places, rather than just trying to kind of amp up everything around him like we see a lot of teams do when they've got that franchise quarterback that they're spending all that money on. All right, let's keep her on moving here and get on over to, let's look at the last place team here last year. And that would, of course, be our San Francisco 49ers. The San Francisco 49ers. Niners decided after a long period of time that they were going to tighten the belt strap this offseason. No more robbing over and over again for tomorrow for today. No backloading these contracts. Let's start making this a little more balanced. It almost seemed like there was a mandate that came down from ownership to go and get this done. And so when you look at the San Francisco 49ers first, before we get to where they're at as a team, before we get to what's going on with them as a team, this is the important part right down here at the bottom. $81.322 million. $81 million, and that is not active money they have to spend. That is not a major contract that they've just given out. That is the dead money currently sitting on the San Francisco 49ers books for 2025. Yeah, they still have Eric Armstead on the roster with $15 million, not on, but counting on the roster for $15 million of dead money. It's just that way for them, but they decided to cut, trim. And they've got a lot of money there. They're basically bailing off. This also could increase as there are still ever-present rumors here as far as Brandon Ayuk and whether or not they would look to move him. So that's still another move that may be coming on top of this for them if they really lean into this. And I know the Steelers are still trying pretty hard to get Ayuk out there in Pittsburgh. They'd love to be able to pull that off if they could. We'll see on that one. As well, when it comes to the offseason, they lost, of course, Deebo Samuel, giving him away for a bag of chips. Dre Greenlaw and Hufanga, I believe both went to the Denver Broncos. Man, I am dying today on the allergies. I should have taken a pill here. Travarius Ward goes to the Colts. They were okay, I think, with letting him go. His play had kind of dipped down a bit. Leonard Floyd goes to the Falcons and tries to help reinforce their edge group out there, along with a couple kids they've drafted. They brought in Demarcus Robinson of the Rams, the man that put the coffin and the nail in the Seahawks against the Rams at home there in that 9 route. He ran over the top of Woolen, where Woolen got caught peeking in the backfield on a run play in cover 0. Always a good look. Mac Jones comes back. They finally get their Mac Jones. There was rumors a few years ago that Shanahan wanted Mac Jones over Trey Lance. Well, he finally gets his guy now. Aaron Banks moves on a monster contract to the Green Bay Packers. Signs a 4-year, $77 million deal to go there. Seahawks got Eric Saubert, one of their blocking tight ends. Not a big signing or a big loss. They are able to get Nicholas Petit-Ferrer in there from the Titans, a guy from Ohio State that's never quite found his footing there with the Titans. The Niners are hoping that they can bring him along a little bit. But you can see here that when you're going to tighten your belt strap, you're probably not going to have a lot of money to go spend out there on the open market. They also brought in Trey Brown, former Seattle Seahawks corner. He is right now slotted to be their starter on the outside, by the way. I think that does speak to a little bit about where their cornerback situation is. I mentioned Hufanga went to the Broncos and Elijah Mitchell goes to the Chiefs. But when you are tightening that belt strap, when you are saying, hey, we don't want to spend a lot of money here, you probably aren't signing a lot of guys in free agency. It's going to be more losses than it's going to be gain when it's all said and done on that side of it. But this is also when you're at the end of your Super Bowl run, when the window's getting very close to the point of closing, that you're not going to have any money to really spend out there, and you're going to have to make some really tough decisions more often than not when it gets to free agency. So not a surprise necessarily for the Niners that they had to finally decide to make these hard decisions and choices. They did just, of course, sign George Kittle to a new contract, making him the highest paid tight end in the NFL. And of course, too, we also have Brock Purdy signing his 5-year deal just a couple of years ago. So the cap situation for them isn't necessarily getting good anytime soon. It's not bad. They've bled out here, you know. They're bleeding out here on the Niners.
Nobody makes me bleed my own blood.
But they are kind of bleeding in full a little bit this year, so that even though next year they're not in a great cap situation, they're not in a horrible cap situation either. We shouldn't overstate it on that side of it like it is some awful thing there for them. When it comes to the Niners draft, if I can find it. Let's see here. Where are we at? There we go. We got them taking one of my favorites in this last draft, Mykel Williams out of Georgia with their first pick, number 11 overall. Really fun player. I think he's going to help them a lot immediately as a run defender, first and foremost, right out the gate there, no doubt about that. And he will develop, I think, in time. Really good player. They really work to try to reinforce the defensive line in this draft. Alfred Collins is a 3-tech run stuffer. That's what he is. You can move him a little bit out on the edge. Maybe there'll be some early down edge rushes where you protect Bosa from some of the run downs, and you have Collins on the edge, you have Mykel Williams on the other edge. You kind of get big on that side, trying to, kind of create the power edge kind of look to it. Be interesting if they go that route. It is possible there. Collins doesn't really give you a lot as a pass rusher, but he certainly is very capable as a run defender. Nick Martin was one of, in the third round, the biggest reaches for me in the entire draft. I think I had a 6th round grade on Nick Martin. He is really, really small. I mean, he is tiny. The guy can run, the guy can fly, but he is itty bitty. Upton Snout out of Western Kentucky, cornerback. That was another bit of a head scratcher for me, though I didn't watch a lot of Upton Snout out there at Western Kentucky. CJ West is one tech that's more kind of penetrating, and I think that this makes a bit more sense to me for them picking him when you consider the fact that Robert Saleh is coming back. Pretty much all the coaches in this division are remaining from where they were last year. There wasn't a lot of changeover, but one of the significant places the Niners, who seem on a yearly basis to spin through a new defensive coordinator, either because they're losing their guy to becoming a head coach or just simply because they're not happy with what they've had as a replacement, bring back Robert Saleh on a second tour of duty. And with Saleh, a couple of the big things that stand out to me with him and continue even when he's gone to the Jets are first, he is loves to run the wide 9. So he's gonna bring probably back that more into play there for them, where you're kind of stretching out the defensive line. And then of course they're not big on blitzing, and they're not going to be big on really flipping their coverages pre to post snap. Kind of what you see is what you're going to get with this Niner defense with Saleh coming back in there. But with a guy like CJ West, with having more of the wide 9, it makes sense that you're getting a little bit more of what I'd call a penetrating nose tackle than a pure, hunker down and hold the line kind of situation. Because you give those guys in the wide 9, I think, a little bit more freedom to get upfield at times and get after it and be able to attack. That's kind of the whole point of kind of widening out the defensive line and giving them that extra space to be able to operate. So West and Collins, full there for reinforcement and stopping the run for the Niners' perspective of things. I think this is a little bit of also getting ahead of or trying to catch up to the trend of where teams are running the ball now more than ever. They go back, get Jordan James as a hammer out of Oregon there in the 5th round. It's a good pick for them. He's going to come in and be productive for them. Connor Colby's an interesting guard for them in the 7th round. A lot of people liked him. And Curtis Rourke, not an interesting quarterback prospect. Can't move much. I think he had an ACL issue last year, so might get healthier, might get more mobile. Maybe an interesting guy to take a look at. They've had some luck in the 7th round with quarterbacks before, have they not? So maybe once again they will. But 3 of these draft picks in CJ West and Alfred Collins and Mykel Williams are there at the forefront, and the skills they bring to play are going to be for helping and stopping the run. The Niners saw that as being a big thing of what they needed to address, and they did so in this draft with those guys. And I think those guys, on a couple of them, I'm not as sure about the upside. I think that at the least as far as the floor goes, you feel pretty good about what they're bringing to the table on that side. So the Niners had an okay draft, fairly solid on that side of things. Get over here to the depth chart. Take a look at where they're at with that. I'm on the right one here. Yeah. I think I got this right. Okay. This is the one I want here. The right one here. Okay. Okay, so the Niners had a little bit of a tale of 2 things going on here with them. First up, we can see that passing yardage for the Niners there, 249 yards a game, pretty good. Now, you were behind in a lot of games. You were last place team, 4th in the NFC West last year. So you're going to have to throw a lot when you're behind. Not a surprise there. They still managed to be 12th in rushing yardage when it was all said and done. Pretty surprising that you were kind of behind a lot of those games, though they were in them a lot. They were never really blown out a ton. 22, almost 23 points a game, tied for 13th in the NFL. They allowed 25.5 points a game, though injuries were a major issue in last season. Fred Warner played through a whole year, I think, with a problem with his foot. Dre Greenlaw never really was at 100% health-wise coming back last season. Javarius Ward was injured through a lot of the year, / had some personal issues going on there as well. Sorry, folks. I got it. You're going to have to deal with the allergies today. I don't know. They're going crazy this spring. So They were able to pass for a good amount, which is kind of impressive considering that Brandon Ayuk was knocked out halfway into the year. Deebo Samuel was at times looking like a shell of himself. Ricky Pearsall had a bullet hole through his chest. You didn't have a lot out there to work with. Juwan Jennings, of course, ascent really did help out there for the Niners as he really came on, was their steady piece there at the wide receiver position throughout the season last year. Just every time it seemed like Brock threw him the ball, he was going to make the catch. Really gluey hands on that guy. Trent Williams, the ageless one, also was dealing with injuries last year, probably in part, and he would say so himself, because he didn't have much of a training camp to get himself healthy and right for the year. So he does come back, it would seem, for another year. I know Jesse at Last Second Sports was intimating that maybe that we're going to get a retirement discussion of him around the draft, but didn't happen. Dominic Pooney, one of the more solid picks in last year's draft that they got in the, I think, third round there, was great for them last year, comes back at right guard. They didn't do a lot, as we saw in free agency, as far as the offensive line, so they're just going to kind of run it back. They didn't do a lot as far as in the draft on the offensive line, so they're just going to kind of run it back. It's just a little bit of the way that this is kind of set up for them at this point. They just trust in-house that they're going to be able to get the job done. You've got base defense. Mike Williams will be your edge guy to the one side. He'll probably be more the power side guy. No, Nick Bosa will be your blind side guy, I would say, when that's all said and done. They've reinforced that defensive line depth around Kevin Givens and Jordan Elliott, so they're hoping that can be strong enough. D. Winters, a guy that they took later on in the draft a couple years ago out of TCU, really filled in well last year for Fred Warner. They had a hard time with Devondre Campbell, who was just a washout and quitted mid-game last year. But they did able to get some reinforcements with Winters. They're going to trust in him to be able to kind of carry it there. They love their undersized linebackers, too. I think Tatum Bethune was a guy that weighed like 210 pounds 2 years ago when he was testing, and then they went for that Nick Martin kid in addition to it. So they really are buying into the undersized, quick, mighty kind of small linebackers out there. Trey Brown from your former Seattle Seahawks is going to be the starting left cornerback out there for them. Their right outside cornerback will be starting Demondre Lamore. Then when you go to nickel, Demondre goes into the nickel position, and then Ricardo Green comes out. Ricardo Green, former Florida State outside corner, played pretty well for them last year. Had an interception against the Seahawks. One of those routes that DK Metcalf rounded out, he was able to jump it and get the pick. Malik Mustafa had a torn ACL last year right at the end of the season, and so I don't know if he's going to be healthy for game one when we play them on that. But him and J.R. Brown, I think, are a pretty good little up-and-coming tandem out there in San Francisco. It's more about where their upside is than where they're at exactly in their game. They're developing, they're coming along. But some interesting safeties that they've got out there. I think overall at the cornerback position, there's some places that you can attack on this team. Lenore is very good as far as a slot corner goes. I don't know if he's as good once you kick him to the outside. But the other guys I think you can go after, if Malik's not in there in that first game especially, that's going to be a place that you can attack. And it's really going to be about probably how you can run the ball against this team, especially when they're going to implement that wide nine. That wide nine can be a pain in the butt when it comes to dealing with those pass rushers, having that extra space to be able to operate and get into the backfield on you. And so your ability to then counter that is oftentimes, if I spread the defensive line out, now I've got those defensive linemen not as shoulder to shoulder. Now I've got natural gaps and natural crevices that are created there post-snap just by their alignment. So if you can take advantage of that, especially having a zone scheme like we can is well suited to go after that, I think, because you can get a lot of those 3 yards in a cloud of dust kind of plays where they just end up too wide to be able to come and help out on a given run play. You know, they can help, or they're helping late, I should say. You know, where if it's more of a tighter front, you can keep it down to a 1 or 2 yard gain, widen it out. I think it opens the door more for those 3, 4, 5 yard gains at that point, even when the defense is kind of playing it right. It's very hard to run that wide nine, especially if you don't have pure elite talent all across the board on that defensive line. If you don't have elite linebacker play between both your Mike and your Will, it's very hard to do. You got all that, you can run it like a well-oiled machine, like we saw the Niners a couple of years ago when we played them. But it's a lot different when you start having to try to, you got some of this here, you got some of that there, but not quite all of what you need over here to get it done in that way. Interestingly enough, too, about the Niners and looking at some of the advanced data, they were one of the better, more efficient teams when it came to blitzing and getting after the quarterback in that way. But they are doubling back down to Robert Saleh, who's going to be a guy that, though he built in some blitzing concepts more than he had with the Niners with the Jets, that's still not how he tends to want to operate. And so it will be interesting to see if they try to lean into that a little bit more for a team that gave up 25.5 points last year, which was the worst for them for many years now. I would wonder if maybe they try to find a little bit of an adjustment to this and start to try to kind of evolve a little bit on the scheme defensively wise. Because again, a big part of them is not only do you get the wide nine that has certainly some ways that it can make a long day at the office for you and how they can get after the quarterback and penetrate. But also their coverages tend to be very vanilla. If you're going to see cover 2 pre-snap, you're going to get cover 2 post-snap. This is Robert Saleh being a former acolyte of Coach Carroll, and I think to a degree kind of believes in this stuff of not changing up a lot of coverages pre to post-snap. I'm sure there's some really good reasons. We don't want the players worried about disguising stuff pre-snap. We want them reading and reacting and getting to the play. But then that does make it a little bit easier for offenses to play you in that they can determine what your coverages are going to be pre-snap. And that's a huge advantage, as we saw it here in Seattle for many years, when you give that to an offense, when you just give that away. And that will be the part that I'm going to be kind of monitoring and tracking with Saleh in this second stop to see if he is still going to lean into that direction of things and think that that's the best approach here, or if perhaps he starts to adjust and evolve this defensive system, because you have to do this in the NFL. You can't just stay in the same place. You got to keep trying to push and move the ball forward, even if just a little bit, even if just to have a little bit of a curveball, a third pitch that you can throw at a team. Because if you're this simple in this day and age, offenses, I think, can really get after you, especially if you don't have that elite talent, which you come back to again. You go a couple years ago and we had Eric Armstead, DeForest Buckner, Bosa. They had depth behind those guys that they could throw at you there. You know, guys that even on just 5 to 10 snaps a game could bring some impact. And so now it's a lot leaner, a lot lighter. When it comes to what they do as far as running the ball goes, this was one of the more effective teams in the NFL when it came to outside runs. That's, of course, Shanahan's bread and butter is going to be that outside zone stuff. So you've got to be able to stop that. You've got to be able to maintain gap integrity on that zone stuff, because there's going to be cutback lanes that are opened up as you're trying to have your defensive linemen stretch to get to those outside lateral kind of runs. So it's a very much a deep. It's going to test you fundamentally to keep your gap integrity. They're not quite as good in run up the middle, but still getting to the edges, they're really good. And a big part of this, of course, will be on the back of Trent Williams' health, because that offensive line, it looks functional and workable right now as you look at the depth chart in front of you here. But you wipe out Trent Williams off that board, you put in Andre Dillard now there at left tackle, and that offense is going to have some struggles. They're going to have some problems. There's just kind of no two ways about it at that point from their perspective of things. They did lose their Jordan Mason. The guy I didn't talk about was a good effective back for them as a fill-in for McCaffrey. I think Jordan James becomes the Jordan Mason, the Jordan for Jordan, becomes the flop out there. They're really going to hope that Christian McCaffrey can come back. He's supposedly now at 100% health, so he's supposedly good to go in that way. All right, sorry, folks. Put this thing off today. When it comes to the wide receiver core, I don't know if we're going to get Brandon Ayuk back or not. They got Demarcus Robinson in there. This is a place where I think you can definitely have some advantages against this team where Juwan Jennings, Ricky Pearsall, that's not as, I think, a horrific matchup for you as far as your corners on the outside. You feel like you can deal with that for prior years where you had Ayuk and Deebo Samuel, so it has gotten a little bit easier there. George Kittle is getting a little bit older, but he had one of his better years of his career last year. He earned that contract extension. So how you play Kittle as well is going to, definitely factor into this a little bit. We saw last year in the first game with Mike McDonald and the 49ers that the Niners really gave it to him. And it looked in a lot of ways very similar at times to old Coach Carroll teams and how they were playing the Niners at the end, where Shanahan was just kind of having his way. And when he wanted to run it, he could run it. When he wanted to pass it, he could pass it. They lost Jordan Mason halfway into that first matchup game with an AC joint issue, and they didn't really miss a beat. Deebo Samuel took the top of the defense off on one play on a blown coverage, and it just didn't. Wasn't a good day that day at home. Now, that was also in the midst of the Seahawks being a little bit beat up, and I think that they were running like three games in 15 days or something like that at that point. So it was kind of right in the middle of the year and in that tough spot of things. They came back then against the Niners a couple weeks after that. Now, Bosa went down halfway into the game. The Niners now were on the other side of it as far as they were dealing with their own injuries at that point. Brandon Ayuk was out. They were definitely limping along by that point in time, so you didn't get them at full strength. And even then, it took Geno Smith with a couple of really cool scrambles at the end of that game, a fourth quarter comeback, in order for you just to pull that win out on the road against a very ailing, weakened Niner team. Now, a lot of people are wanting to propose that the Niners are going to be DOA coming into this year, that the Super Bowl run is over with now. You've paid Brock Purdy this contract extension, and so certainly that means you're toast. you're done. You got, nothing else to bring to the table on that side. And I think that this is a little bit premature. Let's first take a look at one thing. Injuries, snake bitten. You have Ricky Pearsall shot in the chest in training camp. I believe there were multiple Niner players last year who lost a child, including Charvarius Ward. I mean, that's wild. There was some bad things, bad luck, bad whatever going down last year on that team that I don't think can kind of be overstated. They also were the Super Bowl loser last year, which meant that they had a reduced time that they had to deal with as far as to turn around the time and get back to the other side, as far as getting those bodies prepared and ready for the regular season. And we know in recent given history that the Super Bowl losers tend to have these kind of seasons when they come off of it. They tend to be beat up. They tend to be battered. It tends to be hard to get that energy back up to start back at the bottom of the mountain and climb it all the way back to the top. And so having a little bit of that hiccup last year makes a lot of sense. In that it's not that this means that this is a harbinger of they're at the end game. It just means that they are definitely getting down. It's winding down. I think that they've done some good moves and they've done some good job in drafting in recent years to supplement a little bit to just at least kind of keep the window open a crack. But the other two parts to take into account here, the parts that really stand out on this one, as I mentioned, the Arizona Cardinals had the 5th toughest schedule in the NFL last year. San Francisco 49ers, with a .564 winning percentage of their opponents, had the toughest schedule in all of football last year. After it's all said and done, when the records are all filtered out, they had the toughest schedule in all of football last year, bottom of the division, injured crew, all that, bop, bop, bop. Now let's flip this over. Where's the strength of schedule right now, according to the Vegas win totals and their presumptive win totals for teams and where they've got teams going this year? The Niners are right now slotted to have not just the easiest schedule in all the NFL, but the easiest schedule in the NFL by far. So you go from the prior year having the toughest schedule in the NFL to having the easiest schedule in the NFL. There's going to be a bump. There's going to be a benefit. There's going to be a greasing of the wheels having this now in their back pocket and be able to operate off this going into next year. And I don't think it's then a surprise when Vegas kind of looks at that and they go, yeah, we're going to put them at the top of the division then at that point. They're out of their 3 lack of common opponents versus us and the rest of the division are super easy games. It is a real, and the schedule's set up nice and gently for them. There's not any gauntlet. They didn't put a lot of tough opponents back to back or division. So it's one where we're going to have to take care of our business. This is probably a team that's going to be able to get to 11, 12 wins almost, just about without breaking a sweat with that schedule right now. Now, it's going to have to be based upon the health holding up too. Trent Williams goes down, all bets are off. You see a Nick Bosa go down for a big part of the year again, probably all bets are kind of off. They're much like the Rams, going to be a very top-heavy team in that they are relying on those top-heavy parts to maintain and stay healthy in order for them to be their best. But if they do, as they have in the past, then this is a team that's going to be as dangerous as probably ever. Brock Purdy did sign his contract extension. The first-year cap hit won't be tremendous. They do still have a little bit of money, much like the Cardinals here. These are all 3 teams in this division absent. I think maybe the Rams are going to have still the powder dry, as John likes to say, to be able to go make some other moves if they want to go do some other things. I think they're going to run as it is right now. But while it's not the strongest team that we've had to face in recent years, this Niner squad, that schedule and the way it's set up, maybe a little bit more of a return to getting back some of that health here this year if they can on that, still makes them very dangerous, still makes them very tough, and won't shock me at all if we come to find with the way that schedule is flipped from the toughest to the easiest for them this year if they find themselves back at the top of the division. It's one of the easier schedules I've seen in recent history here. All right, let's take a look at the last team of this division, which would be the team that won last year, of course, the division. And that's going to be our Rams team here. If I can find him. My nose. All right, there we go. It took me a half hour there. Hold on one sec. I gotta sneeze. Ah. Man, I am struggling today. Struggling. Okay. Let's take a look here at free agency period and what the Rams did. First place team last year, making some noise in the playoffs. Very close to pushing that Eagles team to the brink and getting themselves to a Super Bowl. They were right there on the edge. Just one more final drive. If they could have executed, it could have got them over the top. The Rams this offseason were able to get Stafford back into the cut here on a contract extension, a 2-year little extension there for them. They flopped out, of course, Cooper Kupp, letting him go and releasing him so that they could bring in Davante Adams. Interesting signing there in part, going from more of a like pure outside guy rather than having, I think, two kind of inside-outside guys in Puka and Cooper Kupp. We've got, they brought in Coleman Shelton there, right guard, kind of right guard centerish type that can kind of work between two from the Bears. Give them some reinforcements on that side. Interesting, another signing for me, and a part that's kind of fun to consider as we talk about that defense and what they roll, is they brought Poona Ford back here into the NFC West. And Poona Ford's coming off the best year of his career. I mean, he was like a top 6 rated defensive lineman by PFF. He was a penetrator. He was a good grade 3 tech. He's far away, really, from those years to me of doing as much of the nose tackle stuff. He can still do that a little bit for sure. So it's not necessarily a part that's completely gone, but he's still a bit like the transition we've seen Jaron Reed make, where the Jaron Reed became more and more effective as a 3 tech. It seemed that they became kind of less effective, less used than as the nose tackle role that they sort of started their career out with. But Poona coming off a really magnificent season for the Chargers, signed on a big contract there with the Rams, and he's going to come in there and hopefully he will be part of the rotation in there. And we're going to look at their depth chart in a second, but the Rams have gone kind of a little 3 tech heavy in a little bit of their approach, which has been interesting to see from their standpoint of things. Christian Roseboom goes to the Panthers, their inside linebacker. They brought in Hunter Long, tight end from the Jaguars, kind of be more of a blocker in there for them. Not any real major moves outside of that you can see here on this side. They lost Nate Landman, Brian Convey. No real big losses. They did bring back Tutu Atwell on a 1-year contract extension, so he's back there. Michael Holt goes to the Bills. Real kind of super try hard kind of player. Gives you everything. He's got every play. Jimmy Garoppolo will be the backup there at the quarterback position, which of course is an interesting decision for them with having Stafford there as old as he is and with some of the injuries he's had. They did lose DeMarcus Robinson to the Niners, so DeMarcus Robinson and Cooper Kupp, 2 receivers they lost this offseason. Joseph Noteboom goes to the Ravens, a little bit of a loss to the depth there at tackle, though Lyric Jackson's really their starter. Noteboom's kind of the fill-in guy. They traded Jonah Jackson to the Bears as it was a disappointing season for him as the rookie there. They just didn't like what they were getting out of him, so they moved on, which is fine. Again, they had the depth to do this with Steve Avila there and the kid that they took out of the Steelers a couple years ago at the right guard position, so they don't have any issues when it comes to their offensive line. But a team that didn't have a lot of money to spend either on that side of it because where they said contractually wise, they couldn't make a lot of noise. They chose to kind of make the noise they were going to make by going out and grabbing Davante Adams and having that be their big real major deal. Aside from that, they just kind of maintain serve a little bit like the Rams, but understandable because they had a great year. They didn't need to necessarily add a lot when you were inches away from getting yourself to the Super Bowl. There's not a lot of a requirement for you to go out there and make a lot of major moves, is there? You can be pretty happy with just kind of hanging out. The Rams for a couple of years now have been looking to get a little more dynamic at the tight end position. Higbee's had some injury issues that have been ongoing for him, and so wanting to make sure that they're not stuck there if he goes down, I think, with this kind of move here and going out and grabbing Terrace Ferguson in the second round. The Rams, of course, made the best trade in the entire draft, moving out of the first round into the top of the second to go take Terrace Ferguson, or middle second. They gave up and got back a future first-round pick for the Falcons, which will be very interesting in the long-term future. But Ferguson is a yak tight end with really good hands out there in Oregon. Get the ball in his hands, let him work in space kind of guy. So that gives him a very cool little weapon for them to use. And he can fit to that, at least that initial role, I think, pretty immediately. How he develops as a route runner and a full meal deal tight end and how he blocks, we'll kind of see on that part of it. But at least as a pass catcher, he'll give them something immediately. Josiah Stewart, I thought, was tremendously underrated this draft. People just don't like his size. He's a little bit of like the Willie Lampkin from North Carolina, but he's not as small as Lampkin is as a guard at like 5'10", 280. This guy's just a little shorter. He's a little shorter, doesn't have quite as much length, but he was tremendously productive for Michigan, both as an edge pass rusher and as a run defender for them. I think that's a guy that's going to come in and find some snaps for them in that defense, and he's going to play really well. He's got some shades to me of a little bit of a Harrison, the old Pittsburgh Steelers undersized edge that they had a few years ago. He's maybe not quite as violent as Harrison is, but he's definitely got some of that in his blood and for how he's built. He plays much bigger than his size. Jarquez Hunter, Auburn running back. They took in the 4th round, hoping to find some reinforcement there for Kyron Williams. Ty Hamilton, 3-tech run stuffer, or no, nose tackle. Ty Hamilton was kind of the nose tackle there for Ohio State, but he's only 290 pounds. So Ohio State kind of rocked him out there at nose tackle. Even though you had the bigger, heavier guy in Tyleik Williams next to him. They were kind of doing a little bit of that Texas Tavondre Sweat, Byron Murphy thing where Sweat starts playing more of the 3-tech and Murphy's playing more of the 1-tech for some reason, oddly enough. Chris Paul, great value in the 5th round for them. Undersized linebacker, that's for sure, only 220 pounds, but very productive for Miss. Really good player. Seems like a leader type potentially for that defense moving into the future. So a solid draft for them for what they had to work with, especially when you consider they got a 1st-round pick back in the future and how they moved it. And those guys are going to be at the very least things that work within the team, whether or not they get high impact off these guys or they just come in and find a role. I think they did a good job of at least making sure they're going to get some returns off this draft class and some immediate returns off this draft class at that. When it comes to the updated depth chart for your 10-win Los Angeles Rams team, we can see that wide receiver, Devontae Adams, will work off the outside. Puka will be outside. Then he'll kick the inside as your slot when you go to 3 wide receiver looks. Tutu Atwell then becomes the other outside receiver in the 3 wide receiver looks. Kyron Williams, number 1 running back. Blake Corum, beat up last year, a little injured. Didn't provide a lot of impact for them when he was on the field. So I think they were hoping to get a little bit more from him. Likewise, you now got Colby Parkinson drifting down to the 3rd tight end role, a guy that they gave a pretty good contract to last year. I think especially with Terrace Ferguson's draft pick, that's one where they definitely don't feel great about that return that they had in free agency from him. Offensive line-wise, they're solid. Dotson there, as I said, a right guard, makes the Jonah Jackson thing just fine. They had the reinforcements there. Havenstein is solid over right tackle. Larry Jackson solid at left tackle. Avilia's coming on as a left guard. Shelton and Bo Limmer down there at center give them both some good strength and give them some depth there at the position in addition to it. Defense-wise, they are going to bring back a lot of the band on this. Of course, they've got some young guys on that defensive line that are playing really well. Braden Fisk was a pressure machine for them from the 3-tech position. Kobe Turner has really been an underrated defensive tackle in this sport. Another guy really who's come along, good all-around player. Another more 3-tech-ish guy to me, more than a nose tackle. You see they have Tyler Davis, Jack Heflin. You have kind of in Kobe Turner, Braden Fisk, and Poona Ford, kind of a lot of 3-techs there. Even Ty Hamilton, I don't know if he's going to be as capable of playing the nose tackle role at 290 pounds as a pro as he did in college. I'm a little reticent to believe on that one. So if you're looking at a little bit of a place where I think there could be a weakness in this Rams defense, and one that was there last year in addition to this, it's going to be the nose tackle position and not having enough beef, being too light a body on that defensive line at times. They want to get after the pass rusher. They want to run their stunts and their loops and do all that stuff, which is all great, all well and good. But when you're that light and teams can hammer you, and if they have a big offense, big, bad, strong offensive line that can get after you, there's sometimes not a lot you can do. You're not going to get any bigger as a team over the course of the game. And they have really, kind of confoundingly so, really dialed into we're going to go light. We're going to go really lean on our defensive line. And that's the place to me where you can attack this team. We watched the Eagles last year with Saquon Barkley in a couple of the matchups against the Rams, able to really get after that lighter defensive line, get after some of the linebackers that, weren't as good. Troy Reader's coming back another year, Omar Spates. These guys aren't lighting the world on fire there. And then you combine that now with also the part that you've got an Achilles Witherspoon coming back, who's a really good corner man, but not the best of tacklers. That's been the problem with Witherspoon throughout his career. He can cover, he can take away the ball and pick you off, but he doesn't want to tackle very much. It's not as much a big part of his game. And so we'll see if he's going to, especially if he's out there with Emmanuel Forbes. Now you got 2 guys that don't tackle on the outside for kind of a lightened defensive line for kind of a weaker inside linebacker core. If you look for kind of the weakness on this defense, to me, it's run the ball and get after them running it. Inside, outside, get after them, force them to tackle, make that defensive line and them show you that they're able to be stout against the run, even though they are a little bit undersized in that way. Secondary-wise, Darius Williams is okay. I said Witherspoon can cover a little bit, but there is some issues with him as a tackler. Quentin Lake is fine as a nickel back. I think secondary-wise, this is another part where it's not super strong. It's not bad. Cameron Curl's kind of league average. Cameron Kitchens, the rookie last year, had a lot of interceptions, had some rookie moments too. I liked him a lot coming out of Miami, so I think he's going to be a guy that's going to continue to develop and come along. And Braden Fisk, as good a year as he did have as their 3-tech in there, by the way, and he was really good and getting some sacks, getting some pressures. But a lot of that was off of the generating the loops and the twists and the stunts, which is fine. We're going to do a lot of that stuff too. And this is a big thing coming along in the NFL now, rather than just lining up your guys in a front four that you're trying to run these games on these offensive lines, especially when you can run those stunts and those loops kind of out of the stacked boxes and the simulated pressures. You bring 7 guys down the line of scrimmage, you drop 3 guys out, you twist and stunt the remaining 4. A lot of confusion you're throwing at the offensive lines in that way. Fisk is really good at that stuff. Really good at getting lateral and getting explosive up the field. But I think he had like a 35 run defending grade. And if this guy's out on the field, you've got to attack him as a run defender. You got to go right at him because he's got 31-inch long arms. You just can't hold up at the point of attack. You can push him off of his spot. You've got to attack this team that way. If they're going to make the choice of leaning to trying to have the pass rush, then you've got to hammer them in the run game to make them pay the price for being willing to do that. Last year, they were really good about generating some pressures and being able to make it happen with those edges. Of course, we saw with Jared Verse maybe had the best year for a pass rusher of anybody in the sport last year as a rookie. So they've got a lot of good strength there. They've got some depth there that they bring as well to the edge group on that. It is a defense that's going to be multiple on you. They're going to run a variety of things. They're not going to blitz a ton, but they're going to run a lot of those stunts and blitzes off the simulated fronts, a little bit like we show at times. And it's very hard to deal with. It creates so much confusion up there in getting the protections right and correct. So something to keep an eye on with the Ram team of how the Seahawks deal with that kind of portion. Can they hammer the run game? And then when you come around to them offensively, the Rams a couple of years ago, last year, invested with that Jonah Jackson situation, and it showed a little bit what they're trying to do, which is the Rams have tried to get ahead of the league trend of teams running the ball and making running the ball a big onus to what you do now, because this is how you attack the cover 2 shell. You get light and box. The light and box is easier to run against. It's easier to run against at times in the A and the B gap because the safety shell players can't get down into the boxes quick when they're off ball that far. So you attack A, B gap, power runs, that type of thing. The Rams did this last year to a really large degree. There was no more effective team in this division at running inside than the Rams. So it was by design, it was by purpose, and it was also successful in how they did it. The Cardinals and the Niners, by the way, are the best teams at running to the edges in this division. If you're looking at that, they're very effective in doing that. But this is the team that wants to get up the middle with you on that and then hit you with the play action with Stafford off of that. And it's very effective, and it's hard to deal with because you've got to get your guys in there for that big, 1,000 pounds they have collectively between their 2 guards and their center inside. And so you've got to have the beef inside to be able to deal with that as well and take care of that. It's also a team that will stay committed to the running game. They don't need to run it for 5.5 yards a carry. They'll be happy with Kyron Williams getting 4.2 yards a carry, and they'll just stay on it all game long. It's a team that doesn't deviate from running the ball. And there's so many games last year, I think, where I saw Kyron have like 23 carries, only average like 3.7 yards, but they stuck with it. So you got to stop the run. You got to force Matthew Stafford in a place where you can get him under pressure and get after his legs. He's still got the arm as much as ever, but he's not anywhere near, he wasn't really super hypermobile in his best of days, but now he certainly has lost a step or two. And it is interesting looking at teams last year that the Rams were one of the more teams that were blitzed heavy in the NFL, where teams said, oh, we don't think you can move, Matt, so we're going to blitz. We're going to force you to see if you can get away from the pass rush. So stopping the run, getting after Stafford as a quarterback with the pass rush. Of course, you got to really just do this with your front four because you start blitzing Stafford and he's going to bury you on the backside with the less defenders into the secondary. So it's a little bit of a balancing act in order to how you generate that pressure. Hawks got the dogs up front to go get it done, but back on the other side, of course, too, the Rams do have the offensive line that pass protects really well and can get the job done to that side of it. So the Rams, much like a lot of the teams in this division, didn't have any real huge major losses this offseason, unless you want to say Joe Noteboom or Cooper Kupp, who had been giving them, I think, a little bit less effectiveness in recent years. The injuries had kind of piled up on him a little bit. They were really only able to add 2. And I think that some Hawk fans were wondering about why Vegas had these other teams in the division up as high as us or higher than us and more improved. I think a big part of it just comes down to like they just feel like they've added on top and they've not lost. There's been no detraction. You're just adding more layers on top of what was already there, which was pretty solid to begin with, as it was from the last season, especially in the Rams' case, of course, being a team that was right there on the edge of getting themselves to a Super Bowl. The Rams last year had the 13th hardest schedule in football, just a little bit over 500, and how it all bore out and broke down for them. So they did have a reasonably tough schedule. Our Hawks, by the way, were at a 498, so just below 500 was our opponent's wins losses last year. So we had a little bit of a slightly easier schedule, tied for basically the 18th hardest schedule in football, your Hawks last year. But the Rams had fairly tough direction to get through on that side of it. They're going to have, according to Vegas right now, the 20th hardest schedule in football as it's set up right now. They got the hardest schedule in this division set up in front of them right now, which is a bit why we do see Vegas, I think, having them as the second place team currently. Last year, they did put up 227 yards passing, which was the 10th best in football. Very impressive when you consider there was a lot of the year that you were without Puka Nacua and you were without Cooper Kupp and you were without Anthony Higbee. So impressive there. Only 103 rushing yards, but like I said, even though it's 24th in the NFL, this is a team that does absolutely stay committed to what they're doing when it comes to running the rock. They're going to stay after it. They're going to stay with it. 21 points for 20th in the NFL, 22 points allowed, 17th in the NFL. So definitely would have liked to see them score more points, I think, from their perspective, but it's explained a little bit when you consider the fact that really Stafford had a few games in there where he had just nobody to throw to. And he was trying to get by Jordan Whittingham and Tutu Atwell being his only like healthy guys out there that he could kind of rock with. So understandable why they weren't scoring as many points. I think once the guys got healthier and things were in a little bit better shape as the year went along, they were able to be a little bit more effective offensively than they had been prior to the year. But it's stop the run, get after Matt Stafford, and get after maybe a little bit of lack of mobility, and especially with him health-wise, if you can get a couple of nice hits in there on him, it's really what you want to do with him there. Defensively wise, you've got to be able to run the ball against the lighter box. You've got to deal with their stunts and their twists. You've got to have a game plan for that and have a way to be able to really penalize them. And I've got to say, a guy like a scrambling kind of quarterback, you're going to have these kind of, stunts and loops. A lot of times what you're going to do is run yourself out of the pocket, or at least allow the quarterback to be given a nice big hole there for him to be able to run through. Guy like a Jalen Milroe on some select snaps gets that kind of look, and you tell Jalen, if you see him start to do this on the defensive line, just go take the hole and run it right up the middle at that point and go. Probably have a spy or whatnot at that point with it, but I have wondered a little bit with that, where they're so kind of sometimes out of control with those stunts and the loops, and they're so committed to doing it, where it's not just, a lot of teams will run their front four and they'll kind of run straight up front four, straight up front four, straight up front four. Okay, now we'll run in a loop or a twist. Whereas the Rams, you'll get kind of like stunt loop, stunt loop, stunt loop, stunt loop. Okay, now we're running legit. Stunt loop, stunt loop. Okay, now we're running legit. And so when you can kind of count on it being run like that, it just kind of feels like from an offensive perspective that there's some ways to be able to go after them and hammer them in that respective things a little bit. Big part of what you're going to have to deal with the Rams, one of the better yak teams last year in the sport, run yards after the catch. You got to be able to limit them at that. They drafted the tight end this last year in Ferguson. He's a really good yak guy. So tackling is going to be a big, big part of what you're going to need to be able to deal with in handling this Rams offense. Kyron Williams is not the easiest guy to bring down. He can be a pretty tough running back. Blake Corum can be sudden, laterally wide, side to side. So bringing those guys down isn't the easiest thing in the book. How you tackle is certainly going to be a big part of how you play this team. But again, Rams aren't going anywhere anytime soon outside of Stafford going down with an injury. They're well suited up this year, and they've done a good job, as a lot of teams in this division. I'll tell you what, you keep looking for the place where's the market opportunity? Where's the place where they're not doing something smart or correct? Where's the bad money being thrown around? Where's the bad draft piece? Where's the philosophy that's going against the times, which is ancient and old? You don't get any of this with anybody in the division, and it's so damn frustrating. It's so like to see them making some mistakes. You look at the money you spend, they're spending their money pretty smartly. You look at how they're managing their books, they're managing their books pretty smartly. You look at the fact that we have an NFL right now that's leaning more heavily in general terms back to running the ball. Go back 3 or 4 years ago, it was all about pass, pass, pass. Let's go lean into the pass. Let's lean in the pass. Now over the past couple of years, the evolution of the sport's gone back to running the ball with the cover 2 shell defenses. And you have every team in this division highly committed to running the football. And not just highly committed to running the football, but able to bring in power concepts, especially to be able to attack that middle of the defensive line that gets a little bit weaker with a little bit of the lighter boxes, with the cover two shell defenses. Everybody's well accounted in this division, including this Rams team, to be able to take advantage of that trend and the way the game is going. Just doesn't make it any easier for us, doesn't make it any easier for any team in the division. I've often said that if you're going to win the Super Bowl, you've got to have the feast factor in your back pocket. Usually at least two teams that are having a little bit of a struggle bus year where you can have 4 games that you're able to walk out of that and say, look, we got 4 freebies on our schedule. Our schedule might have stacked up relatively tough. We might have to get through a little bit of a gauntlet. We got the 4 freebies right there. Well, I'll tell you what, there are not going to be any freebies when it comes to this division, and you're walking through it. It's going to be tough every single week that we got to play these guys. And the good news is at least that we're used to it. This is the way it's been for 10 years, and it's not stopping anytime soon. It's kind of odd how this division's been able to maintain this level of play. You know, you have your divisions like the NFC South that are just the can't get right crew, where you wonder if there's even going to be one team that gets to 10 wins on the year. And here in this division, we're going to have probably 3 teams this year with winning records by the end of the season. Hell, your last place team might have a 500 freaking record when it's all said and done with these easy schedules. So it's tough. It ain't easy, but you'll have earned it if you have won it. You get to the playoffs, you go make some noise in the playoffs, you'll have earned the right to be there. That's for sure, 100%. You guys let me know, though. Are you guys scared about what you're seeing with these teams this year? Do you think that they're getting overrated? Do you think Vegas has overrated all of them, that these teams are actually set up for a fall? I'll tell you, there's a couple of places you can always find on all these given teams, a couple of very select specific spots where if you lose this here or you lose that there, you don't have really anything supplementing. You don't have any insurance policy to overcome that, and you're going to probably be sunk. Stafford goes down, Jimmy Garoppolo is not taking the Rams to a division title. If Trent Williams goes down as a left tackle, almost that whole 49er offense and the way it looks changes wholly at that point. And that's just counting on a guy in Trent Williams is like 38 years old, by the way, who's had his share of injuries, who's played a lot of football. I would say even to the Cardinals' point of it would be the same way. You know, if they lose a Marvin Harrison Jr., for instance, what do you have at wide receiver? What else is there now? Who do we got to worry about? Why can't we just concentrate fully on your run game and taking Kyler Murray's legs away then at that point? I think the nice thing about Seattle and what they have done, and maybe one of that is a little bit of a different place in this division. Now there's another side to this, of course, because we're the team that's presumptively being pegged to be the last place in the division by Vegas. But the one nice thing about Seattle is that you can see that they've actually had reinforcements put into a variety of different places. We're not just relying on a couple of edges, and if those guys go down, we got nothing. We're not just relying on even Sam Darnold as just our quarterback, and if Darnold goes down, we got nothing behind him. You got Drew Lock, you got Jalen Milroe. You've reinforced it in there a little bit. Obviously, we've got our own questions when it comes to offensive line and whether that's going to be up to snuff finally or not, and we're hoping the new coaching can really help that on out. But I don't think that we've got as much of this gets tripped and that gets tripped and more sunk, which does exist in some of the other teams in this division if certain specific things get kicked out. And so Niners, Rams, I think they're a little bit top heavy, and they're going to be really reliant on their difference makers to be able to carry the day. It's worked for those teams in recent years. So while it's not the greatest of gambles to always make, it has worked out for them. And with the Cardinals, they've gotten better and better under Gannon. They have doubled their win total last year from what they did in the first year, which was a successful year. And they've really done a good job, I think, of getting that defensive line reinforced to where they're going to be dangerous this upcoming season and not going away anytime soon, which would be kind of nice. But unfortunately, it's just not going to happen. I thank you guys for watching today. If you could for me, hit that like button, as I would really appreciate it, as we are trying to get showing up on those algorithms, and you can help me show up on those algorithms by doing that. God's Gang, thank you for the $2 donation. He says, of our rookies, which ones have the starting job? Ooh, good question. Well, Gray Zabel is going to be starting God's Gang. I don't know if it's going to be left guard or center, but we get to game 1, he will be a starter. I have no doubt, almost no doubt about that. When it comes to the rest, because, even Arroyo right now with Fant on the roster doesn't necessarily have a clean, clear opening into how he's going to be able to get on the field as a starter, per se. I could see him get on the field, but just more of a kind of a role player there. Emawari is going to probably be a little more role player to start out with Kobe Bryant still here. it's not, it sounds like a bad thing, I guess God's getting to put it this way, but it's the reality of it, which is that you're going to have one player from this draft outside of Robbie Oots. Robbie Oots is going to be your starting fullback, but that's kind of an asterisk one. So Gray Zabel is going to be your only day one starter of this group. Emawari and Arroyo are going to be more fitted to be into fitting a role in their first year. Riley Mills has got the ACL. He's going to be out. Torrey Horton's going to be your starting punt returner, but I don't know if he's going to take a lot of snaps at wide receiver initially. I like Cable Dude long term, but he's transitioning from tackle to guard, and I don't know if he's ready to come in there and become a starter in that way for a guy that's a 6th-round pick. Martinez will be a role guy in there, he'll get touches, but not going to be your starter, and Richmond and White, we'll kind of see with those two guys. So, it's not, normally you might not like saying that, where you're like, well, we're only going to get one starter out of this draft, but it's also about the positions you picked and that these guys you went for upside and you weren't picking for need and picking for value. This is what happens. You end up a little bit stacked on the depth chart at times. But that's when you're looking for difference makers and you're looking to go for more of a ceiling, this is what happens. When you go for need, you might fill in more holes. But that's where you gotta pick a lane. A lot of people like to pick the middle lane and do both things, when instead you got to kind of pick one or the other. And the Hawks definitely, in this one, God's getting signaled that they were going more for the upside, more for the potential. And then that meant you might have a couple guys you draft that aren't going to be instantaneous starters. You're going to have to wait for that a little bit. Seth K. Aloha. Thank you for the $2 donation, Seth. He says, B, what do you think we do with our remaining cap? Well, a little bit of a teaser for tomorrow's show, Seth. Your timing is great for that, actually, on that one, in that is going to be a little bit of what we're looking at tomorrow, in that we're going to be taking a little bit of a deeper look at your Seattle Seahawks cap space and what they can do with it and the options that they have in front of them. I think that there's going to be a combined couple of factors at play here. I think John, by and large, is probably going to kind of sit and wait a little bit as he can. But right now, your Seattle Seahawks are sitting, I think it's the 6th out of most cap space. 1, 2, so they got the 9th amount most of cap, or 8th most, because the Niners contract with Brock Purdy's off the gate. So they have the 8th most amount of cap space at $31 million, which is a significant amount of money to have at this time of year. I do think the Charles Cross extension is coming down probably before the season goes. They're going to get that done. And once that happens, that's probably going to lop off another, $8 to $10 million off the cap, taking you to more like $21 million. Now, do you look to cut Noah Fant at some point or another, or trade Noah Fant at some point or another? Fant right now has the second highest cap number on the Seattle Seahawks at $13.4 million. He would only cost $4.5 million to move, so you would save almost $9 million, and you could take yourself back up. You could take yourself essentially back up to that $30 million territory after you sign. It's like the Charles Cross deals in the Noah Fant release, essentially. I think that there's not a specific way that John's looking to move right now, Seth, with the remaining cap space. I think instead what John's gotten very much hot to trot on as far as a general idea, and that where he sees there being a market opportunity to go and get a depressed asset, to go get an asset that I don't have to give up prime assets to get back in return, is he looks more into that training camp area of things, where there's maybe a guy with a contract dispute, or there's a guy that just wants out of town, or there's something that's gone weird in a situation or wrong in a situation. Developments, some come out of left field that nobody anticipated, and that then gives you an opportunity to jump on that guy, where if you're trading for that guy before a draft, you're giving up max draft capital, and maybe you got to give him a contract extension. I think John does really, with all the trades he's made in that training camp period of time, Seth, Sheldon Richardson, Jadeveon Clowney, last year Connor Williams that you signed. Hell, there's Jamal Adams trade that you made in the training camp for that one. He's done this a lot of times over, where at that time of the year, he just looks at it like, look, I'm not giving up prime assets to do it. And I think if he was to be real honest with you, he'd say, look, it's really about in getting those trades done. It's not really then about whether or not you can come to a common ground with the team about what to give up draft capital wise. The thing that ends up impeding those deals from occurring is not that you guys come up with the parameters of the deal. It's that you don't have the cap space. The guy's got X amount of dollars that he's going to hit you up on the cap when you make the trade for him, and you just don't have the room to do it. So they have maintained that room to make that move now. I can't give you the specific as to what the move would be, because I don't think John really would know what it would be. I think he's just kind of keeping a side eye. Maybe it's an offensive lineman. Maybe it's an edge rusher. Maybe it's a cornerback. I mean, maybe they get in on like the Jalen Ramsey thing. I think there's a lot of, I think even right now in that room and out there in Renton, I think they're probably turning over these different myriad of options for that money, including maybe not doing anything, Seth. That's where this gets hard, where I could certainly see this team just getting through this year and deciding to try to roll over a good chunk of this money. You spend some of it, maybe you make a couple of contract extensions, sign a guy here maybe in season as you need some help, or trade for a low-end contract, $2 million on deal here for a guy that's got some quality to him. But then you end up rolling the money over. I think that there's a little bit of an open end to this, and some of it's just dependent on them monitoring and tracking where the team is. You get into training camp and you're like, oh, we're here. You know, we should be aggressive. This team's ready to roll. They could use that extra part, put them over the top, and we'll be in prime real estate. Or they get in training camp and they're like, yeah, these youngsters are still probably going to take another year here. Let's not be hyper aggressive with it. Let's sit patiently and let this thing play out and grow another season. So it's a bit open-ended, Seth, and I'd love to be able to give you a little more of a exact prediction on this one. But unfortunately, it does feel a little bit open-ended to me right now, where you could go so many different ways. I would fall back on the history of Schneider being that you've got all this cap space. You got his history of making moves right around training camp. I would say that kind of comes together and causes a deal to eventually get done somehow or another. Maybe it's just a Wyatt Teller kind of deal where you're just reinforcing the line, but something happens at least. Something. Jackson, I think Vegas is just always low on the teams in the Pacific Northwest. Every single sport, they're always low on them. Seahawks the top left corner away from the other teams. To your point on that, Jack, I ran a little bit of a research on that over the last 10 years when the show we were talking about about a week ago on this, discussing just that very thing, which is that last 10 years, Vegas has been only right on the Hawk win total once, and that they've had 6 times that they have been too low on us. 6 times. And when they're too low on us, first, when they're a little bit over our win total, the other 3 times, they're 2.5 wins off when they're too low on us, and they're only about 1 win off when they're above us. So there is quite a difference on that and how their outlook is, to your point on that. That is the way that's kind of played out a bit with that. Yep, Catalyst Woolen's also a possibility of being extended. If he goes out there and lights the world on fire and they really like this guy for what he can bring on that, he's a possibility there. The cost is going to be so great to pull him in. It's going to cost you $20 million a year for both him and Cross. And I have a lot more confidence in Cross being that guy. But there's nothing to say that they may not potentially go that route too. You know, maybe John just sits on this money and he decides it's all going to extensions, you know, be it Cross, be it Lucas, be it Lucas comes back and he's full health. You know, you don't want to get him on an extension as well. So, you know, they may just, that's where it gets hard in that question, Seth, where there's so many directions they could go with that money, where it's like, well, we're just going to reinforce the investment in our team on the guys that are already here and give them their extensions and reward them and bump and a bump, you know? Yeah, Seth, they could just sit on it too. Yeah. I feel like I don't have a real pulse yet on what John's going to do, whether or not they're going to be hyper aggressive or not. And some of this is the fact that you've taken this offseason with the step back approach. You moved off Geno, you moved off DK. You sort of did a little bit of the step back, not in that you can't be good next year, but that you just weren't being hyper aggressive, typical of other teams at that point, which are just like, hold on to everybody and just like everybody else in the division kind of did, you know, keep everybody and then just add on top to what we got. And so that does, I think, open it up more open-ended to the possibility that this thing's gets executed a little bit more patiently and that there's less of a drive to have to maximize 2025, you know, like some of the other teams in this division are with the window sliding shut. And there's going to be a lot more of a drive from those teams this year from where they stand. Specifically in the Rams and the 49ers case. Those are teams that are more kind of in that mode, I think. Harder to tell with our Hawks. Could become that way. It's just harder to tell. Yeah, CD Woods, I hope they trade Fant too. I think the money can be put in better places, even if you're taking that $8 million, $9 million, and that becomes rollover money alone. I think that's just better than rolling right now with what we got in Fant. I think we just know what we have in Fant. He's a subpar blocker who gives you functional play as a pass catcher, but not tremendously dynamic as a pass catcher either. So it's like I didn't like the contract at the time we signed it. I don't like it any much more now. And you can save so much significant money by moving off of him at that point. Just call it a day, you know? Call it a day. HHG, we picked up Cross's 5th-year Bs, so I don't think John's going to extend him this year. It doesn't necessarily mean that. No, HHG. It's leverage stuff. Contract negotiations are driven by leverage. So, if you play out this year with Charles Cross and you don't have the 5th-year option activated, then he's a street free agent after year 4. And if contract negotiations are tough and he's pushing for the ultimate amount of money and you don't have the leverage to say, we have your 5th-year option we can force you to play upon, then he now has leverage and you don't. So you just don't want to give up leverage, and you want him getting down to the number that you want him at. And that's what putting the 5th-year option allows them to do. So I would still expect that a contract extension will get done. It's just they want to make sure that they maintain that leverage. Says, you know what? Funny, all of a sudden the rest of the league views moving off of Geno as a step back. But when he played for us, he was terrible and was our detriment. Yeah, you're talking about that was the narrative of basically the national perspective on this when we had Geno here, which is most of the time with Geno. Well, you got Geno. What are you going to expect to do? Now we lose Geno, and they're like, what are you guys going to do? How are you going to get over the Geno loss? And this is kind of wild to watch the national perspective on narratives change kind of overnight at times, just depending on where a player might be from a landing spot or where he's playing at. And then I don't know why. But Geno's also just one of those weird players that I've ever kind of seen in NFL history in the way that fans view him, not just from a local perspective, but from a national perspective. He's a guy that got a rep. Maybe it was the whole betting thing in there with New York and all of that. I don't know, but he definitely got kind of put out in a way on that. Come on, she's over here. Emma. Was it the Rams got lucky last year? Well, they definitely had a lot of close games they were able to pull off. Definitely pull off. All right. Well, we're going to put a button on this one at this point. We are coming back tomorrow to take a look at your Seattle Seahawks and where they are sitting cap space wise. There's a little tease on tomorrow's show. It's in there at $31 million over the cap right now. So you have a lot of money that you can go out there and make run with. You also, let's not underrate this part of it too, when we talk about tomorrow a little bit, which is going to be looking at the future of the cap space for the Seattle Seahawks. It's not just about where you're at in 25, it's where you're at in 26 and where you're at in 27. Why? Because the new name of the game is the void contracts. You don't play that game, you're going to be behind the 8 ball to a considerable degree in what you can go out there and spend on players versus what other teams are spending on players, because they're bearing so much of that voidable year money. Eagles are just running this roughshod right now, and it's going to force teams to have to maintain that. So what you want then in the future is you want to have that future cap space with as few of those void years as possible, especially if you're not a team that's yet into a contending state status. But that's going to be for tomorrow, for the show tomorrow, as we take a look at both the cap situation with what's going on right now with Seattle and where they're at coming into this year. And we're going to look at a couple years down the line with them as well to get a good understanding of what they can and cannot do and how much flexibility they do have, which is a tremendous amount, much more than many of their other teams in this division, including the Rams, including the 49ers. So very well set up for that when this does click in, when we're expecting this Mike McDonald regime and everything to lock everything all into place, and they've got the plan implemented and you're rolling and the young players are coming up and they're reaching their prime and they're ready to go. You've got the money to spend then to keep the core in place, to go get the supplemental parts to put it up over the top. You're setting the stage, and this is what doing things intelligently is all about from an NFL team perspective, is that you do a variety of different intelligent decisions, you stack them up together, and that's where you get to the place of your fundamentals being right and true and proper and good. And that's where it's at right now with your Seattle Seahawks. So we will be covering that tomorrow. I thank you guys for watching today. Again, if you could for me, please do hit that like button, as it does help this channel grow tremendously. We just got past 90,300. So thanks for helping us get past that mark here on this side of it. We got shows coming all throughout the week here. We're going to keep rolling on through this offseason. Keep it on going. So just keep on tuning on in. I thank you for watching. We'll be back in less than 24 hours. But until next time, please don't you ever forget. Don't you do it. Don't you do it. Go Hawks.